kiss and hug me. Come on strong, go on and love me. Let's not waste that big old moon. Wake up and smell the perfume. Just say if you want to be more than friends.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a Social Web Cafe interview with the lovely lady, Marj Wyatt. Welcome, Marj.
Hi, Deborah. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure thing. I've loved this time to get to know you a little bit on these Hangouts. This is great. And I noticed you have such a rich background. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do?
Who I am, what I do. Well, you know, I used to answer that question, what do you do? I would ask to have it clarified. Do you mean for money or what do I do? You know, they're two different things. But for profit and fun, I guess, you know, my bread and butter business is website development on WordPress. And but my background is pretty varied. I spent more than 20 years in corporate America in various roles related to marketing and communications, and wound up getting involved in the web team because I was the only one in those companies that even understood the possibilities of the technology when it was brand new. So they tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to lead that group. And that was fun. Got to do some groundbreaking things at the time. This was in the early 90s, by the way, 93,
That
94.
was a real groundbreaking period.
Yeah.
So everything was new.
Everything was new. What's this thing called a browser? You know, I mean, you know, the things that I'm passionate about doing, aside from my hobbies and petting my cat, are, you know, things related to marketing, discussions, and of course philosophy. I love philosophy, but well, every web project that I get involved in, I always ask the client, you know, what is the business purpose of the site? And you would be amazed how many don't really have one and don't understand why I would ask that question. But it has a lot to do with the further advice I'll be giving them about, you know, where they should go to find their audience, you know, how the site should be set up to attract people into it. You know, and I mean, a lot of people just don't think about, oh, you know, I got a book, I want a site. Okay, great. What's the book about? You know, where do the people hang out? Where will you market your book? And I mean, you know, they go, well, why are you asking these questions? Because it has a lot to do with how we go forward. So yeah, I've got a vast background, technology, sales. I was in real estate sales for a while, and I did that after I left corporate America, because the whole time I was in corporate, people said, you should go into sales. And then they offered me this wonderful, you know, severance package, and so I went off and I was a salesperson for a while. And you know what's cool about, you know, the life path is that all of these things that I've done are still being leveraged in my current bread and butter business. You know, because I have the, you know, the technology where I started. I've got the marketing and communications that I learned in corporate America. I've got the enhanced marketing and customer service things that I learned in real estate. You know, and if you think realtors are just salespeople, you know, that's a whole nother discussion, because they are marketers. That's what they do. And then I came to the web and said, now what? And here I am.
Now, it sounds like from what you are describing that when you say web developer, I'm sure those people are just thinking just the website, but you really are like a web presence developer, because it's not just the site, it's helping them to really see the big picture, and this is an opportunity to reach your clients. So you really are encompassing all of those skills into one task. It's more than just the web.
It seems to be, and a lot of people have commented on that. They've, wow, usually a developer just does code. I said, I can't limit myself that way, you know, and I can't, you know, and you know, there's discussion about, you know, am I a consultant? Am I a coder? You know, am I a geek? I don't know. I'm Marj Wyatt. And, you know, you know, I mean, that's really where it lands. You know, I am, or as Popeye says, I am who I am. You know, and if I see an opportunity to, you know, give a recommendation or steer somebody in a certain direction, you know, with regard to their project, you know, I'll definitely do that.
Well, you have the experience to support that too.
Yes, I do.
The varied experience as far as I value my corporate experience. I don't. In some cases, I'm thinking, okay, I've been there, done that. I'm not sure if we'll repeat that, but I really value the experience because you learn from each experience. Oh, I'm starting to feel this urge to go into philosophy.
Yeah, we did that last time too. Well, when we had our brief meeting last week, I did say that the most valuable things that I got out of my college degree were the philosophy, classes that I took, because it helped me to find ways to connect with people, where it matters to them. I could, liberal arts. I love liberal arts. People can go be engineers, but, I'm left brain, right brained, and if I can think about what I'm doing as opposed to just doing logic, I'm much happier.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Let's say left brain, right brain. I'll be going for the next 45 minutes on just.
Okay. Well, the cat's out of the bag, so go for it.
It's that, personally, I feel like I live in both, and it's always that challenge to kind of bring both sides of it as far as the art to the logic. And I think it's a fun challenge in life because the logic is really helpful as far as the functional level.
I do agree with that.
Is so beautiful. It's like the art really hits the heart, and the logic is for the brain. And we're not walking around like one organ with feet. We're complete creatures.
Yeah, and that's why when you say, what do I do? That's a hard question to answer because it depends on how I feel that day.
Hey, that works. That works. You told me a story in our last hangout, and I love the story as far as talking about your real estate and reading people. And I mean, in a good way, as far as being intuitive to be able to reach them where they're at. I'd love to hear that story and have you share it with the audience.
There's, but there's the one about, connecting with people, with, my clients. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, we're taught to avoid discussions like politics and religion, but when you're working with somebody on a long-term project or, buying a house, for instance, it's kind of good to know what you can talk about. And the ways that you do that is ask questions. So I use the example, I think, of, trying to figure out if the client that was in the car with me in 2001 was, very different politically than me. So we drove by a road sign. I said, how do you feel about that? And the road sign was support our troops. And I did want to support our troops, but I wanted to know where she stood on the whole issue. And I learned, I learned how to communicate with her. But the more fun story that I think you want me to talk about is a parable of Henry Ford, where people have protested. Where people have protested my rates, for doing, well, it only took you a half hour. And, the parable goes like this. Henry Ford years ago had trouble at one of his plants, and he invited a consultant in to tell him what was wrong. And the consultant was there for an hour, went away, and told him, sent a response with an invoice, and the invoice was for $10,000, and Ford got upset. 10,000? You were only here an hour. So the advisor he reframed the invoice and said $100 for my time, $9,900 for knowing what to fix. And I run into that a lot in my business because people want to value the service by the amount of time I'm spending, and I'm not typical. The amount of time that it takes me to figure out what the real problem is and solve it is probably much less, than other people. And I don't bill by the hour anyhow. So, I bill by the project because then I can avoid those debates. But I have had people, say, well, why do you charge so much? Because I can command it. People will pay my prices all day long and tell me that I'm underbilling them. I've heard that more than once. God, you should be charging more. I don't know. I'll charge what the market will bear. And of course, I do take on some pet projects, Deborah. Some causes that I really believe in. I'll give them deeper discounts because I really believe in the project and where they're going.
And I'm thinking, wow, $10,000 back then was a lot of money. Even $100 was a fair amount of money back then. Wow. That was brave of the guy to bill, but I love his response on that. That's a great story.
It's
and great
perfect.
illustration.
It's really just perfect. And why do some people know what to do more quickly than others? Because they've spent decades acquiring that experience. And you know, so one of the things that I do when I encounter what I'll label as a price shopper, I'll just tell them, if you're after a low price, I'm not your gal. If you're after somebody who will be your partner, bringing your business online, let's keep talking. And I've lost business that way, and that's fine. I don't like working with people who are only looking at the, well, this should only cost that. I mean, it's not up to them to tell me what my time is worth, but it's taken me, 30 years to learn what I know. So there you go.
I think that's really good that you let them know up front, because why waste both of your time as far as the price shopping, like you said? If they're looking at that from the first moment that you talk to them, it's going to continue throughout the project, and it's just not going to be conducive to the model that you represent.
And it will cause tension. I mean, really, people get a whole lot more out of me with regard to the, stated time frame, because of the nature in which I work with them. I help them with their marketing. I help them learn how to use the technology I'm delivering. I mean, a lot of people come to me, they have never signed into a WordPress blog in their life. They don't even know what's possible. So they get an educator, they get a consultant, they get a marketer, they get a geek, for lack of a better word. There's a lot rolled into the package, Am I the best out there? I don't know. What's the best? That's one of those subjective judgments. But I know that the people that come to me stay with me and are happy to refer their friends. And that's really all I want right now.
I think that's the key, is that that proves it, that you're doing what works for them. And you're not out there for the price shoppers. A lot of us are not out there for the price shoppers, but there are people that will be conducive to those types of clients.
And they're frequently, with all due respect to them, they're frequently the most demanding and the most difficult to work with. So I figured that out finally, and I went, oh, this is my business. I get to work with who I want, and I don't want to work with people like that.
Right. And it's interesting. It sounds like it's something that you've learned over the years with all of your vast experience in different areas in life, and got to. I like how hey, it's my business. That's a good place to be.
Well, you have a corporate background, and both of us are happy for the experience we acquired there. But in a corporate background, you don't get to choose with whom you work.
Correct.
When it's your business, you do.
Yeah, in a corporate background, you have to learn how to realize that life isn't going to be perfect, and how to work with different personalities to make it work well for the company.
Right.
For yourself too, but it's about getting a company to move forward, and personal issues are set aside as far as not taking the focus off on the company.
Right. And, a lot of times, another thing that I've learned, it's almost like a psychiatrist or a psychologist, that you might be attracted to become a friend with somebody, but doing a paid project for a friend is often not a fun thing, because they seem to expect more. So if I feel an affinity for somebody as I'm working with them, I will hold back a little bit until the project's done. And then I'll just stay in touch with them. Hey, how's it going? And build a friendship. I mean, I'll be friendly, but I won't start telling them stories about my life and, all of the other things you get when you are just my friend, because...
That is wise. Guys, did you hear what she said? That is so wise. I can relate to that, because I make the mistake of, I always tell myself, okay, don't say how many kids, your pets, or, anything. And then I get so personable, and I go there, and it's like, oh, right, you need to keep kind of that little bit of standoffish.
Just a little bit. Janeway in Star Trek did that. She was, the ultimate standoffish captain. She just didn't interact with the team at all, but, in some ways you do have to, I mean, obviously you have to tell them something. You have to connect with them. But sticking to business while you're on business is always a good idea. And if a friendship develops through that, that's great, and they usually do for me, because I'm a friendly gal.
I like it.
Thank you. I like you too, but
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yes, it is something I've learned over time.
But that is wise advice. So if any of you listening can try to implement that, even to a certain degree, just a little less personal information that you give your clients. I can speak of experience that always goes better for me in the client relationship if I do that.
Right.
You seem like a very intuitive person. Do you think that people have to have that intuitive nature to succeed, or is there a way to learn this?
Gosh, can you learn intuition and empathy? That's a bit. Yeah, I mean, because it's kind of the same thing.
Like reading clients, do you think it's not? You've given some tips already in this interview that help, just some practical steps that people have to write on a sticky note and stick it on their desk. Okay, remember, don't get too personal with your client. Things like that. Do you think some of this over time people can learn, even if they're not naturally intuitive?
I think the thing that gets in our way, when we are a professional in any arena, I don't care what it is, if you can remove, and I'm going to use the word ego, if you can remove your ego from the conversation and focus on what they are actually asking for and listen more than you talk. Seek to understand, not to be understood. Okay, I mean, I can't put it any more simply than that. Have them tell you, and I learned this in sales actually. I mean, I'll tell you the real estate story. Again, a real estate story, but this is a hilarious one. A woman came to me and she had her dream home. So during the, interview when we were deciding if we wanted to work together, I took notes on all of the things that she wanted in her dream home. And when I set up appointments to show her houses, I always referred to that, compared it to the MLS listing, and I showed her 6 of her dream homes, but none of them were it. So I started listening, to what it was that was missing. I said, tell me what isn't perfect about this, because it's got all 25 items on your list. And then I started looking outside of her box and finding a home that didn't have all 25 items but met her vision. And that's a listening skill. Listening is a hard skill to learn. I've noticed that more and more. I don't have a solution for it. I have a feeling that the problem could be caused by this inundation that we have with information all the time. People are always talking at each other, always tweeting at each other, always, texting at each other, and we aren't really listening to each other as humans. I'm sorry, I can't help but be philosophical, Deborah. I really can't.
No, I love it. I was thinking about that and all kinds of different things while you're saying that, but that's so true. And this is something that's come up in several interviews, several discussions I've had with people as far as the social media where it's at right now is very broadcast oriented. Mm-hmm. That was the MySpace model too. Go put your ad on other people's pages, and that was great for a time. It was new, but you start to lose the engagement.
Yeah, and I mean, engaging with a human being requires, interest, and I used that word before. You have to be interested versus interesting, and there is a distinction. And you have to, and you can't be false about this, because people know when you're faking it. They do. You have to be genuinely interested, and then that goes back into really caring about each other as people. So listening, one of the things that I've even thought about putting together a communication course, because so many people don't think about their words. They just fall out of their mouth. And I'll give you an example of that. So I was interacting with somebody in a Skype chat last night, and I would give my opinion on marketing, and he would start his response with the word no.
Every time? Like every response was no, and then the rest?
No. And then he'd tell me what he thought. And so if you parse that, what that's saying is, you're wrong. I'm right. And a lot of people don't think about it that well. People don't think that way. Well, yeah, they do. Mm-hmm. What you can say is, well, thanks for sharing that, but here's how I feel about it. Or, can you tell me more about that, please? There's just some really simple questions you can ask that will give an air of acceptance and make people want to tell you more.
And I think that can be learned. I want to give hope to people that are not intuitive, that they can practice some basics. And like your story about pointing at the sign about the chirps, I was thinking about your presentation on that was so ideal because you didn't say, hey, I'm in support, or hey, I'm not in support. What do you think? Because it puts them in a position of they either have to agree or disagree. You put it into their space as far as what do you think? I'm interested in hearing what you think.
Right. And I mean, that comes in basic sales 101. Don't ask the yes/no question. Ask questions to get more information. And that you'll see that in copy. If you look at copy on a page, you will see that if it's good copy, because they'll draw you into the story. And they'll, in an interactive consulting, if you're asking questions in a way that the answer isn't yes or no, unless it's needed. And sometimes with technology it is. Do you want a picture in the header or not? I mean.
What do you think about a picture in the header?
Yeah, well, there's another way to frame it, I guess, but sometimes it is, in tech, it is a binary thing. But when you're trying to develop a relationship, an ongoing relationship, that will be long lasting and bring more referrals, you have to think differently. And it just comes down to basic things we probably learned in kindergarten. And
what happened? Did we forget over the years on how to talk to people? I think maybe we didn't overthink it when we were in kindergarten.
Well, and there's actually that. I'm interacting with a bunch of people who are writing Kindle books because I'm interested in creating, a book. And one of them said, well, how do you think up a story? And I said, well, how do you think up a story? You tell it. And then I was listening to Prairie Home Companion yesterday, Garrison Keillor, and yes, I'm a former Minnesotan. But I mean that. I'm
like, whoa! Somebody has heard of the. Okay, I got excited for a moment there.
Yeah, no, I mean I love Garrison Keillor, and what a storyteller, And kids, I was thinking about it as I was listening to him. I think. And I don't mean to be critical of anybody, and I know I'm just as guilty as the next, but I believe that we've lost touch, with our fun sometimes. And we're so focused on what we're trying to do. And when we receive a message, if it's something that controverts, an opinion that we have of ourselves, if we can't step back, and view it objectively, then things escalate into not so fun times. Am I making any sense at all?
Yes, but I might have to listen to that again. No, that's really going in the philosophical level. Yes. Have we lost our ability to even laugh at ourselves as well, and to realize the fun of the moment, and to take things too seriously?
In a I don't know, it's not malicious. We'll call it a mischief sort of way. Okay. One of the things that I have the most fun being mischievous about is teasing people who take themselves too seriously. Because they're so easy to tease. I mean, I think the Indigo Girls said in a song, was to help me take my life less seriously. And there's really core good advice in there. And, so what can people do who don't feel they have empathy or intuition? Actually we all do. It's just the level at which you employ it in your business. And, if someone doesn't feel that they have those skills, you can learn it by, practicing with, strangers or clients, or asking the open-ended questions that I've recommended. I mean, it's just like, how do you feel about that? Please tell me more about that. Because one thing leads to another thing all the time. And yes. you can find out a whole lot by letting them tell you.
That's so true.
Yeah. I don't know. People are interesting. I love people. I don't know. I don't know.
Minneapolis Airport to watch people.
What? The Minneapolis Airport? Where I used to go.
I wasn't at LAX at that point. So.
Where I used to go when I was a kid was the laundromat.
Oh, that would be good.
It was a pretty fascinating people study because they came in there, being totally themselves, and so you kind of get to watch how they interacted with, their laundry and their kids, and how
they interacted with their laundry. Should we be admitting that we actually like to go watch people?
I think we should. I think it's okay to watch people as long as you're not being a voyeur. You know, I
Yeah.
never say that word right. You know, I mean, if it's not awful, because people are, gosh, you know, we're here to, as a society, let's talk about the word society. We're
Okay.
social creatures. Social creatures watch each other. You know, they learn from each other. That's what we do.
And that's actually expected. If you're talking about children in a village raising a child, the children have to watch how their society around them functions in order to learn how they should function.
And the same thing is true on the internet, Deborah. You know, when you join a group, you know, if it's a Skype group, if it's a Google Plus community, you know, getting the lay of the land, who's who, you know, what do they think, what do they talk about? You know, we're children in that group. You know, we figure out, you know, what the rules are by observing more times than not. You know what I mean? Am I making sense here?
Yeah, that is making sense. And that is a form of people watching. So now I don't feel so guilty announcing that I people watch. But it comes back full circle to what you were suggesting as far as listening, learning to take in what's around you rather than just broadcasting who you are. Or as you said, so I get this, being interested instead of just interesting. I love that. That's
The other way
that's great, Marge.
Yeah, it really is a good one-liner, and it's a good summary. I mean, we all like to talk about ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we really do. But it, you know, if you're going to, I don't know, it's so if you take that into consideration, I guess, if you understand that you like to talk about yourself, so do others, then it's easy to be interested in what they have to say. As long as they aren't making you feel like you're wrong for thinking differently. I had a very interesting exchange with a woman who, her viewpoint and mine disagreed. This was not business related. She's a pal. And I said, well, you know, we'll have to agree to disagree. You know, I let her have her opinion and I wanted to keep mine. And her response is, I hate it when people say that. Why? Because it means they aren't listening to me. And I had just spent an hour listening to her. And I said,
Wow.
I said, no, you know, I mean, in my opinion, it doesn't mean that. It means that.
I like that. In your opinion, that's.
Yeah, I mean, we've exchanged viewpoints. I've agreed, you know, that yours is valid, but I'm going to hang with the one that I have. Well, you know, they should listen to me. And I mean, maybe it was just that individual, but I don't think she's alone out there. I think there's more people like that who would.
As far as that particular phrase that represents that they feel that they haven't been heard.
Yeah, they feel discounted when you say we'll have to agree to disagree.
Wow, I never thought of that. I like that phrase because I think it allows each person to have their own opinion. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very diplomatic. I don't use it often, but when it comes down to that point where in order to end that particular discussion, to say, I have the freedom to retain my opinion, you have the freedom to retain yours. Because otherwise it feels like one has to bow down to the other. Yeah,
that ties back to ego. You know, if you can't get out of the way of your own ego, you won't be able to hear, you know, what you just described. You'll say, well, they're not listening to me. So, you know, what are the components of a successful business relationship? Listening, you know, which is an interactive skill, you know, asking open-ended questions, and of course getting out of your own way. You know, just let it go. You know, don't get hung up on whether or not, you know, they agree with you or every word you say. It's not about you. You know, it's about.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. It's not about you. So, okay, if that made sense.
That's true in life. That's true in so many areas. And I feel like just when I think, hey, okay, I've got this, there's so much more to learn. I won't have figured it all out even when I die, but it's wonderful in the journey.
Well, we're all students of life, hopefully. You know,
we're all students
because
of life.
as long as we're living and breathing, we're learning, I hope. You know, from watching people.
We're not stalkers, so just people watching.
Well, and exchanging viewpoints, you know, because we all have different ideas, and, you know, even if it sounds on the surface like it's something that, you know, would be off-putting, sometimes asking those open-ended questions, you know, gives you more information that you can use in that business relationship, in that personal relationship, you know, that you hadn't thought of before. Because everybody brings in their own little field, you know. Hey, I've been over here. You know, Deborah's been a corporate executive, you know, but, I mean, we've all been around. We bring it all to the table when we join together. I love the ocean in the background. I can see it in your picture. Sorry, just thought I'd go there. Okay.
At the end of the day, though, we're all humans.
Right. Oh, and I have a one-liner for that you've probably heard before.
Go for it. I'm ready.
I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. That gives me permission to be emotional.
I like that. I have to write that down. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience that gives me permission to be emotional.
Yeah.
That's great.
Because a lot of people say, well, you can't get emotional. Well, of course you can. You're supposed to. That's the whole idea. That's one of the gifts. We get to feel things. Don't get me started on the argument I had with somebody about whether or not emotions and feelings were the same word. But
I don't know. You mentioned Janeway, and I have to confess I haven't watched. Oh my word! I'm like, what is that in Star Trek? But I picture the Borg that have. there is no emotion.
Yeah, the Borg, and they always have a character in the Star Trek, genres. There's always one without emotion. It began with Spock, and then they have the Vulcans. They always bring the Vulcans in, or a robot, But Janeway was criticized as a captain because she wasn't as, reachable, as a character. She was more aloof, and I've been accused of being aloof before, but as we were discussing earlier, you don't have to open up the kimono all the way immediately.
I started thinking kimono. Okay, that's not what she said. She did not say kimono.
No, kimono. Yes, I mean that's
okay.
One of those,
all right.
I mean you can let it out a little bit at a time. But am I aloof? Are you aloof? I suppose we are until we get to know each other. Mm-hmm. And how do we get to know each other? Interacting, talking, listening, sharing viewpoints. And how does that propel your business? If you are easy to talk to, and I've had so many people say, "My God, you're the best teacher I've ever talked to." Because I'll stop in, because sometimes the stuff I'm saying I believe is complex, and I'll go a little ways in, then I'll pause and I'll say, "Did you understand what I just said?" Give them a minute to digest it. And apparently,
does that surprise them? Does that surprise them that you've taken that moment to check in?
It seems to. You're the best. You're the best teacher I've ever had. Well, I don't know. Where did I learn that? Maybe my mother. I don't friggin' know. I learned it over time, though, probably. Things that seem to work. And usually those things that we learn and employ are things that worked for us. We liked it. We brought it into our space. Am I making any sense?
Oh, you are. I was just thinking, I'm getting ready to teach a 30-day class in Hangouts, and I was thinking part of it is just getting out there and trying things. So even if you're going out to practice listening, get on a Hangout with someone, engage with them, a private Hangout, and just practice communicating.
Yeah. Then see what you can learn, see what you can develop. Intuition is not exclusive to women, by the way.
I believe that. I think my husband has some gifts in.
But I've thought about that too. Because there's all these sweeping categorical statements. And one of them is that women talk too much. And women have intuition and men don't. And I believe that, as human beings, we all have the same stuff, we just use it differently. And what women do seem to have more of is the ability to empathize as opposed to fix. And I'm not gonna say that's wrong in either case, but sometimes you'll describe a problem and or an experience you're having, and if there's a male on the other end of the conversation, he might start telling you what to do to make that fixed. And if there's a woman involved on the other end of the conversation, she might ask questions like, how did that happen? And is that true? But I've had men do that too. There's no stereotypes in Margiverse. I'm going to say Margiverse. Um, because there aren't. Nobody there, it isn't role specific, it isn't gender specific, it isn't culture specific. It has to do with your ability to learn, listen, whatever. I feel
And I
like
think we all have our gifts as far as how it fit. There might be behavioral tendencies in genders, or the hunter-gatherer kind of thing, but you're right. There's some men that empathize more than other women, but maybe those women are fixers.
Maybe they are, and there are times, I guess, when you slip into that role. A mother with a small child, kiss a boo-boo. You got to fix it. Just let the kid wail, but kiss their knee anyway, so that they feel like they've been loved. And I think that's really all we want is acknowledgement. That's another thing that I believe people fail on. And I won't say fail. That's a harsh word, but I already said it. But when you yeah, you heard it. I'm busted. But when you send out a email or a Skype text or whatever your method of communication is, getting a echo at least lets you know you've been heard. Have you ever sent an email out to somebody that you felt was important, and a week passes and you don't hear anything?
Yes. One of those, I took a lot of time to really not just write it, but go over it and make sure that, and it wasn't about me. I didn't feel it was me broadcasting. It was me trying to give words of encouragement. Mm-hmm. And then you get nothing and you say, okay, did I offend them? Should I not have sent that?
We have to at least say, I hear you. Mm-hmm. And that is but here's another thing on communication. Sometimes when you say, I hear you, people will interpret that to mean that you agree. So you have to be sort of careful with that one too. Yep, I hear that. Now go on. That doesn't mean that I'm saying, yeah, you're right. You're right. I totally agree. I'm just saying I hear you. So that I'm out here and my ears are open. I don't know.
I'm laughing because my husband and I will use that. I'm giving the public way too much of it. But if either one of us say, I hear you, that usually means I totally don't agree with you, but I respect that you said that, and I do hear that you said that. So it's like that's a cue to say, nope, we're not acting on that one, but I do hear you.
Well, see, and that's a style that you've developed over how many years of marriage and knowing each other? I don't know. I mean, what advice can I give people who want to be, WordPress website developers? Just, or anything. I mean, to be consultants, to be an entrepreneur. Let's use that word. First of all, in my world, it requires belief in yourself. So now we're back to ego. And this is an interesting discussion for me. People like to view ego as being completely negative, but yet, without self-confidence, you can't do things that you've never done before. Like True. Make your own money. When I stepped out of corporate America and decided to become an entrepreneur, I had to have some self-belief, confidence, ego, and saying, well, ego is bad. No, it's not bad. It's essential. It's, how you use it.
Isn't it needed for survival? I mean, if you go really to the base level of absolutely no ego, and I'm actually thinking of this poor little chihuahua that I remember seeing years ago that had been abused, you get to a point where even the sustenance, even in this case, the dog getting up to go eat, you have to have enough that you've got some survival, and then build on that, like you said, as far as our entrepreneurial level, to go out and make the money. If you have no ego, you don't exist. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I know that's a fair statement. You have to be decisive. You have to believe in yourself. When I became an entrepreneur, here's the song that I listen to all the time in my car. It's a song by Kay's Choice called Believe. And the refrain is, I believe in me. Because I had to. I didn't have a husband or a mother or a sister or a brother, to tell me, that I was cool. I had to believe that I was cool enough to make money without going and getting a job.
And that's intentional. Is that like you get up and Marge, I believe in you, like your own cheerleader every morning?
Kind of got, like I don't know. I keep referencing stupid things, but you need your own set of pips. So to Tracy, I mean, it just, you got to have your little cheerleading squad back there, and you also have, I call it the committee. I've got my committee. And, the committee, urges me on, or the committee says, and sometimes there's a naysayer in the crowd, and I have to handle that part of my mind that's telling me that, what I want to do isn't possible. And, yeah, I'm crazy, aren't I?
No, you're not. I'm mesmerized. Okay, I'm not worshiping you, but I'm mesmerized.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we do have a lot of thoughts, that, and I don't know, I could go on and on and on. We could spend 3 hours talking philosophy here, but we don't have the time. We don't.
I'm looking at the clock going, wow, we've been talking for a while. I mean, this has been wonderful. I'm thinking this is almost like 2 interviews, whereas 2 podcasts. It'd be like, come back next week to hear more philosophy from Marj Wyatt.
If you want to do that, I would be happy to do that. I could spend, I've often said, if I could figure out a way, to do this and then still put food on the table, like give away philosophy, but still have cash flow, I'd be happy. That would be my.
You should start a podcast.
I could start a podcast.
You could do, 5 to 7 minutes, even, daily or every other day.
Oh, that's
on a thought for the day.
The thought of the day. And
yes.
And I do have thoughts. Yeah.
There you go.
Will I always be out here being a code geek? I hope not. If
But you are, first and foremost, you are Marj Wyatt. Not just a code geek. That's just something you do, but you're Marj Wyatt.
Right. Exactly. And that's where we started. What do you do? Well, I live and breathe.
So that said, how do people find you?
How do they find me? Well, they find me on Skype as marj.wyatt. Dot's important. Or they can go to my website that I put below, and they can fill out a contact form. And then that will get to my primary email address, and we'll figure out what we're doing next. Phone numbers are helpful because I like to talk to people. When they come to me with a project request, you can't really scope a project in email, in my opinion.
It's true.
You kind of have to get on the phone and listen.
Exactly. And people have had that opportunity to get to know Marj Wyatt a little bit in this interview and this podcast. So go visit
Deborah.
Marj at virtuallymarj.com.
That's there. Did I type it right? Yeah.
Yes, you did. The problem was I was speaking, so Google's camera was on me, and I'm like, okay, what did... So go visit Marj at virtuallymarj.com.
Yeah, and I guess the caveat there is that, I use the term cobbler's child for my own website. We always have the worst shoes. But, at least the contact form is there, and the site is under redesign, and you've seen my face and heard my words, and haven't said much about... That's the key. Yeah, I haven't said much about, my technical skills, but who cares?
They've had a chance to meet you, the person, and I think that far outshines even any amount of technical skills.
Thank you, Deborah. You're awesome.
You're welcome. I've sure enjoyed this interview and getting to know you better. Thank you so much for joining us for the Social Web Cafe interview. Look forward to posting this and
me.
letting you know.
Sorry about the technical hiccups to begin with.
Oh, no problem. Hey, that's part of life, is how can we overcome the technical hiccups in life?
There you go. Okay, sweetie. I'm going to sign off now, or I think we're done.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that works. Thank you.
Bye.
Don't you want to kiss and hug me? Come on strong, go on and love me. Let's not waste that big old moon. Wake up and smell the perfume. Just say if you want to be more than friends. Got some love I'd like to make. Baby, you can squeeze me, I won't break. We could be in a paradise, you and me. Until then, I'll remind you again. Just say when. Oh yeah, until then, I'll remind you again. Just Just say when.